Hey photographers, this is the new Sony A7R III, and in the next 25 minutes I'm going to go through its features and functions to help you understand what it can do and how it works. Now if you're in a hurry, there's an interactive menu in the description below to help you skip to the part that's of interest to you. What's new is a 10 frame per second burst and increased focus speed to keep up. Standard ISO up to 32,000 and extended up to 102,000. Stabilization is improved by a stop. There are 2 SD card slots, and an improved battery doubles battery life. Yes, applause is appropriate. There's a new pixel shift mode and hybrid log gamma for increased video dynamic range. I'll detail those right after I review the basics. The A7R III is a mirrorless camera with a full-frame sensor. In the A7 series, our cameras have high resolution, and the Mark III delivers the same 42 megapixels as the Mark II with the same sensor. This camera has DxOMark's highest rating for a full-frame sensor. The resolution of 42 megapixels is quite impressive. I found the quality of the images to be very pleasing in all aspects. I'm not a pixel peeper, but in my opinion, these are the clearest and sharpest images I've seen from any camera. The Mark III uses Sony E-mount lenses, and Sony provided the new full-frame G-Series 24-105 f4 for this review. Photographers and reviewers have been throwing shade on Sony lenses for a while, but lenses released in the last year have received high ratings and awards. And it remains a relatively small and light camera. It's slightly deeper, mostly in the grip to accommodate the new battery, and only 30 grams heavier. With this lens, it totals up to 1,300 grams. The A9 has taken the flagship position in Sony's mirrorless lineup, but it's surprising how close the Mark III comes. For a burst test, I set the quality to JPEG Extra Fine, not sure why the default setting is just fine, and put all the settings, exposure, focus, white balance, to manual, mechanical shutter at 1/1000. There's a buffer status display. It's off by default, which you should enable. It's the white bar screen left. High Plus is flicker free, but has a slow refresh rate. It captures 10 frames per second, 100 images in 12 seconds. High Speed has a slight flicker in the viewfinder and the LCD. It captures 8 frames per second, 91 in 11 seconds. After filling the buffer, both start to stutter, slowing to about 2 per second. The buffer holds about 70 images, and even with a UHS 2 card in slot 1, it takes 45 seconds to clear the buffer, which severely limits camera operation. Interestingly, the high-speed burst rate is about the same with silent shutter, about 5 with the front curtain enabled. The A9 had some interesting displays for silent burst shooting that have not been implemented here. Fast burst requires fast focus. So can the A7R III keep up with a speeding locomotive? I'm using continuous, lock-on expand flexible spot positioned where the engineer enters the straightaway. Each pass takes about 2 seconds, about 17 shots each, and when I hit the shutter exactly as the train hits the spot, my success rate was over 80% in 20 passes. And what impressed me most was that with the shallow depth of field of an f4 aperture and considerable focus change through the travel, the first, the furthest image, and the closest image were always in focus, and occasionally one in the middle was slightly soft. However, in practice, I found that my technique for getting focus aligned for the start of a burst needs work. It's worth noting that the A7R III does have focus speed options. I was using the standard setting, but there are 2 faster, 1 slower, and 1 lock-on option. Pixel Shift Multi-Shooting combines 4 raw images into a single file. This is a tethered operation, so first download the 3 apps required to your computer. Both Windows and OS X are supported. The dedicated portal provides detailed instructions. On the camera, turn Pixel Shift mode on. And there are several time options, and I'm sure that one of you will let me know why an inter-image interval of greater than 1 second might be useful. Connect the camera with the USB cable. Launch the remote app which connects to the camera. Then use the remote shutter release in the app to take the 4 images. The Viewer app loads with the 4 files. Click Edit to load the Edit app, make the adjustments needed, and then export. Both TIFF and JPEG are supported. Both the 253 megabyte TIFF file and the 34 megabyte JPEG file I exported have a resolution of 42 megapixels. I also captured an in-camera JPEG, also 42 megapixels. Now, more data is always good. There are differences between these files. They are minor. When I took an image focused on the cactus, the difference really seemed to be less in the detail of the spines, but more in the smoothness of the background. But here's my takeaway. It's an interesting learning opportunity to try tethered shooting, not just for pixel shift, and to spend a little more time with these 3 interesting apps, particularly as Lightroom doesn't yet support A7R III RAW. The new hybrid log gamma is provided in picture profile 10, where it's combined with the BT 2020 color profile. It's a standard, joining an already crowded field, that provides both a greater dynamic range and a larger color gamut. Its advantage is backwards compatibility with standard dynamic range displays, and it's supported by YouTube. There's a lot of dynamic range captured in this file direct from the camera, and I've hand-tuned it for these results. Seems very useful, particularly compared to the S-Log2 results. The deeper grip makes the camera easier to hold, but the gap between the lens and the grip is a little cramped, scraping my knuckles. The thumb rest provides good support on the back, and the front and rear dials are perfectly positioned, with the right amount of recess and the right amount of friction not to be disturbed accidentally. The mode dial has the 4 standard modes, 3 custom positions, standard and S&Q movie modes, and full auto. It's press to turn. I'd have preferred press to lock and unlock. Now, on a DSLR, it makes sense to have the menu button on the left. After all, you have to remove your eye from the viewfinder to see the menu. But on a mirrorless camera, where the menu appears in the viewfinder, it's much more convenient to have it on the right side. Please. I think Sony finally has the video record button placement problem solved. It's beside the viewfinder. Now, it's neither accidentally pressed or too hard to get to. Now, optionally, the shutter button can be used in video mode, and you won't find that with the other button customizations. It's on tab 2 screen 3. Otherwise, buttons are well positioned and the ergonomics have improved. The control wheel doesn't switch from one setting to another inadvertently. It seems to be modal now, so that when you're adjusting ISO, for example, you can no longer accidentally press a little too hard and start adjusting drive mode. That's appreciated, particularly in cold weather with gloves on. The joystick, or multifunction selector in Sony's lexicon, is used to move the focus point. Pressing the joystick recenters by default, but this is a customizable setting, so assigning it to Eye Autofocus or AF on are options. And while we're here, there's a button on the lens, the focus hold button, and it can also be assigned. I've assigned it to IAF, which is a truly wonderful feature for portrait shooting. It enabled me to be fast and accurate shooting candids at a birthday party. I love the right side door. It snaps open when you press the latch and snaps closed. So nice. Incidentally, UHS 2 is supported in slot 1, UHS 1 in 2. Yeah? Now, flip the camera over for meh. The slide on the flap releases, but must be slid up to close. Then, there are the terrible covers on the left side. Granted, they need to stay open while cables are connected, but they have to be pried open, and the little plastic thing that holds it seems overly flimsy, and the top one's always in the way of the bottom one. Please, let's have the same door as on the right side. And now, I'm a big fan of HDMI clamps, otherwise the fragile little micro HDMI cables get damaged and dislodged much too easily. But juggling cables and port covers into place while trying to attach this one requires careful maneuvering. And once it's in place, you don't want to remove it. I recommend the Tether Tools Jerk Stopper. Much simpler. Attaches and detaches easily and quickly. Link in the description below. Here's an Easter egg. If the LCD screen is flat to the camera, the viewfinder's eye sensor switches between LCD and viewfinder, but when you rotate the screen up, only the LCD displays, meaning you can hold the camera close to your chest without blacking out the screen and without having to change a setting. That's thoughtful. Overall, the design is pleasing if somewhat utilitarian. However, there are kind of a lot of little edges for dust and dirt to accumulate. Whatever. The Fun menu, which is completely customizable, remove the items on screen 2 and it collapses to a single line, is the starting point to set exposure. Select a meter mode, 2 recent additions, entire screen and highlight, which exposes down from the brightest object. For spot metering, there are now 2 sizes, standard and large, and tab 1 screen 10, the spot can be linked to the focus spot. Incidentally, if you're using the viewfinder and have selected the LCD viewfinder support screen, pressing Fun activates the right side to make the adjustments, but without an interactive screen of your scene. Press Disp to switch to the histogram. Again, the carousel of display options can be customized, but histogram can't be combined with other displays, nor can it be moved or size. Select the ISO on the function menu, Auto with minimum and maximum, and use the menu to set the minimum shutter speed, which can be a value, but auto can be controlled with the fast faster and slow slower settings, which manages the ISO and shutter together. In program mode with standard, this scene would be 1/80th at ISO 500. Then with faster, 1/320 at ISO 2000, or slower, 1/20th at ISO 125. This certainly adds additional power and flexibility to auto ISO. I'm no longer surprised when images at ISO 6400 turn out to be pretty decent. But when text remains clear and there's no color shift all the way up into the extended range at 102,000, that exceeds my expectations. In program mode, the front dial is program shift. In aperture and shutter priority, both dials control the setting. In manual, front aperture, rear shutter. On tab 2 screen 8, this can be reversed if you prefer, as can the rotation direction governing which direction increases and decreases. The electronic shutter, called silent on tab 2 screen 4. Why do these still settings appear after video settings? It's completely silent with an electronic shutter. With silent off, you can disable the electronic front curtain for the full DSLR experience with a substantial mechanical double click. Shutter ranges from 1/8000 to 30 seconds and bulb, available in manual. The range is the same for the electronic and mechanical shutters. In manual exposure, you can choose either to preview the exposure, so you see the effects of changing aperture, shutter speed, and ISO as you make them, or, tab 2 screen 7, change live view display to setting effect off for a consistent display regardless of setting. I prefer on. DSLR types may prefer off, and I'm not a Sony salesperson, so I'm not going to tell you that this bright, clear OLED screen with 3.6 million dots is equivalent to optical. But it does work in video mode, and with the Finder frame rate set to high, 120 frames in NTSC mode, it's very nice. And the menu may be complicated, but it makes the camera perfectly responsive to your preferences. And if you're using the LCD in bright sunlight, there's a setting for that. Or if you're shooting in the dark, there's a setting. Oh, wait, note that the custom keys are now independently set for stills and video. Love that. But could that happen for the function menu too? Oh yeah, shooting in the dark. It's only available on a custom button. On screen 18, use bright monitoring. And then a completely dark scene will become visible. Note that this is only available in manual focus. Back to the function menu to select focus mode, single, auto, continuous manual, and DMF, which enables me to use the autofocus to set and then the lens focus ring to adjust as needed. I do find the focus areas confusing. Mostly wide works for me, but my second choice is flexible spot with 3 sizes, moved using the joystick, multifunction selector. Face detection doesn't appear on the function menu by default. I've replaced exposure compensation. but honestly it is a focus mode. And Sony has moved it to the focus menu, Set Face Party in AF, where it can be disabled or enabled, and the face detection frame can be selected to display or not. Eye detection is available, and sometimes it happens even when it's not activated. To activate, assign it to a custom button, and I've assigned it to the focus hold button on the lens. It's slightly awkward to configure, but incredibly useful. Works even when face detection is off, and if it doesn't catch an eye, it goes for the face. But usually it gets the eye. Honestly, once you've had this, you miss it on every other camera lens combination that doesn't. Eye detection is a single focus mode, which isn't available in video, although face detection is, even when shooting 4K. Back to the full function menu to set white balance, auto, a bunch of presets, Kelvin setting, 3 custom settings, and set to capture a custom setting, and a green, magenta, blue, amber adjustment panel for fine tuning. Back to the menu for auto white balance priority, standard, ambient, which will be warmer in low light situations, and white for a whiter low light balance. Creative styles provide further color controls, a bunch of presets for predefined scene types, but each can be customized with contrast, saturation, and sharpness settings. For more dramatic colors, picture effects, which are not compatible with RAW, provide a selection of options ranging from interesting to gimmicky, but that's not to say I don't use them, although the selection is more limited here than on other Sony models. And finally, picture profiles, which are primarily useful for video, are also available for stills. This is an incredibly deep and rich, if confusing, selection of tools to adjust the sensor's response to color and light. More on that when we get to video. Let's go back to the function menu for the drive modes, although the default shortcut key is the left side of the control dial. In addition to the 3 burst speeds, there's a self-timer with presets of 2, 5, or 10 seconds with 3 or 5 images. Would be nice if both time and number could just be dialed in. A wide range of single and auto bracket modes, exposure ranges up to 3 stops with 5 images, 9 images at 1 stop. Also white balance and dynamic range brackets, not as powerful or complete as some of the other cameras in this class. Now, my favorite drive mode, video. There are actually few changes here from previous models, and while they're relatively minor, like hybrid log gamma, proxy recording, and the ability to start and stop recording with the shutter button, I'm thankful for them all. Sony treats video more seriously than its competitors, and the inclusion of an HDMI cable clamp shows that. No one in the consumer space comes close to the range of capabilities that are available here. On setup screen 2, there are both NTSC based on 30 frame and PAL based on 25 frame modes. I'm showing the NTSC settings. There's no 60 frame or cinema aspect ratio in 4K, and bit rates are still low. UHS-2 can do much better, and I keep hoping for a higher bit rate. But with 2 cards, video can be recorded both simultaneously on setup tab 6, select Simult, or sort to record video on one slot, stills on the other. In video mode, all 4 exposure modes are available, both for regular video and the S&Q, slow and quick modes. There are sensor crop options for video mode to crop to the equivalent of the super 35mm area of the sensor. It activates automatically with a crop lens, but you can force it with the menu. HD in both XAVCS and AVC-HD, and 4K. 24 and 30 at 60 and 100 megabit data rates. HD 24 to 60 frames, maxing at 50 megabits, 120 frame at 100 megabits, useful for footage you'd like to slow down, and I actually prefer this to the SNQ mode as it records audio. Proxy files. Now I wish there was a setting to record them on slot 2 and the primary file on slot 1. The proxy files are under 10 megabits at 720 and saved in a separate folder from the main clips. Proxies are not available with AVC-HD or for 120 frame recordings. If you are simultaneous recording, proxy files are saved on both cards, but note the numbering of both proxy and main files may be different between the two cards. That creates confusion and is hopefully addressed in a firmware upgrade. One issue: if you want to record 4K to both SD and HDMI, you'll have to turn proxy off. When proxy is on, the HDMI feed blacks out. Video, as on other Sony cameras, includes the full suite of video useful features: peaking for focus, marker for safe areas and alignment, and the most complete zebra available in a consumer camera. Levels from 70 to set the exposure for white skin to 100 plus for overexposure, and 2 custom settings where both the setting in the full 0 to 109 range as well as the deviation from 1 to 10 can be configured. Particularly with Sony's picture profile gammas, this is a useful tool to have. Autofocus speed and sensitivity can be adjusted for video. And let's take a minute for S&Q, where the record setting, which is actually the playback frame rate, can be set from 24 to 60, and the recording frame rate can be set from 1 to 120. And that enables quick motion to 60 times, as close as the A7R III gets to time-lapse, and slow motion to 5 times. Note that all S&Q recordings are silent. Sony continues to be the leader in support for external recordings. In addition to an extensive set of timecode options, the HDMI panel enables timecode output and then the ability to start and stop the external recorder with the camera's record button. And while the functionality is terrific, the implementation is lacking. The HDMI info display is not available in 4K, there's only clean output. And the 2460 output select only works under very specific conditions, which I've detailed in other reviews. I'll put a link below. And although other cameras may offer log gammas or color controls, the breadth and depth of Sony's picture profiles, a signature video feature, but available for stills as well, is overwhelming. I can't begin to detail what you can do here. There are 10 presets, but the capabilities hidden in the settings and subsettings range from the useful to the technical and arcane. The highlight here, no pun intended, is S-Log, which changes the sensor's response to light. Well, as Max will otherwise point out in the comments, the sensor doesn't change, but the processing of the data coming from the sensor does. To demonstrate the dynamic range, I'm using the DSC Labs Xyla chart, a back-illuminated chart that shows up to 20 stops of dynamic range. Each rectangle going from left to right is 1 f-stop less than the one to its left. Now in a dark room, I can see about 18 stops of light, so let's turn out the lights and see what the A7R Mark III can see. With picture profiles off, about 8 stops are recorded above the noise floor. As we go through the profiles, you'll see that the response is changing. Some provide more detail in the shadows, others in highlights. With Profile 7 and S-Log 2, the range changes to about 10 stops. I'm showing you the out-of-camera recording. The black levels are high, the white levels are low. Now this is with the full range recovered to a standard dynamic range display. Profile 8 with S-Log 3 gets to about 12 stops, very compressed out of camera, and now with the range recovered for a standard definition display. The hybrid log gamma in Profile 10, although there's clearly clipping in the top 3 white rectangles, also captures about 12 stops. And while we can capture, there are still very few displays that can do justice to this kind of range. Soon though. I would caution you not to think of either picture profiles or S-Log as a magic setting that will improve your videos. And in fact, S-Log, which resets the ISO and compresses the dynamic range, may in fact reduce the quality of your image. I've detailed that elsewhere as well, link below. And if you want to do either color correction or color grading in post, the limited amount of information captured in a very compressed 100 megabit file does not leave a lot of latitude for adjustment. To capture a neutral image, I'd recommend that you use the Creative Style Neutral setting, and if you want a more filmic look, turn down the detail and the contrast slightly. Creative styles are also useful to create a monochrome look, or customize a profile to use one of the cine gammas. Just cycle through them to determine which captures the detail in the scene more accurately or more to your creative vision. The takeaway here: Sony provides more features and settings to enable your creative vision than the competition. Take advantage, but test and evaluate before you jump in too deep.
Now a sweet, sweet hymn for you, a song for me.
I haven't mentioned the touchscreen. Its functionality is limited to focus, which is much less than the competition provides. But that feature is truly useful for video, particularly for a rack focus. Touch on an object, the camera focuses and changes from continuous to manual, cancel to return to continuous mode. And interestingly, Sony is one of the few to enable shutter speeds slower than the frame rate for some interesting effects. Note that there's no 1/48 setting for those who want a pure 180-degree shutter implementation for 24 frame recording. There's some rolling shutter effect in 4K. In HD, not so much. I've decided to use the remote control app to show you the one candle scene. Now, there's a lot that the app can do. There's a menu and I can select a custom white balance, but I can't capture one. I can't set the audio levels. I can't select a picture profile. So I've selected Cinema 2 and Pro Color before I started recording. But after that, I can select the shutter speed, and I've got 1/30th because it is kind of a dark scene. I've selected f4, which is the maximum aperture on this lens, and then I've got ISO 6400 right now. Now I'm going to just turn that up slightly. I mean, I think it's okay, but a little brighter might be good just so you can see the scene. There's 10,000. And we're recording. Now, as you saw in the Shogun, I am using autofocus continuous. It's set in wide mode, and face detect is on, but you can see it's not detecting my face. That said, it is maintaining focus not badly. Now, this is a recording in HD, which I had to use for the Shogun recording. Now, at the very end, I'll show you the same scene in 4K and let you compare the difference between the two. There are some things that Sony has removed, features that were available in previous models. The A7R III does not have a panorama mode, unlike its predecessors, but of course, photographers in this class likely prefer to shoot a series of images and stitch them in post. However, if we're going to go pro, I'd have started with the picture effects and that green auto mode. And then, one of Sony's best features, downloadable apps, are not supported here. That's a curious omission, as it means there's no time-lapse option. The most used features from the downloadable apps, image transfer and remote control, have been implemented in firmware. Battery life is excellent with the new battery, but the camera can also be powered and charged with USB. In general, I found the menu to be slightly less responsive than most. I've ranted about Sony's menu structure with specific issues about the A7R III elsewhere, link below, but among my specific issues here are location of format. I don't care what screen it's on, but I want it at the top. Luckily, that can be fixed using my menu up to 5 screens with 6 selections each. Now, I wouldn't dare to think of asking anyone except Sony for this, but a voice-activated menu, even just to eliminate that left side button, would be great. Hey Sony, shutter to 1/30th, f4, and change to 4K video mode.
Okay, Maarten, you're ready to shoot.
That would be nice. So until we get voice control, I'm using the remote app, and this time I'm recording in 4K. The previous was in HD, so that I would have the recording from the Shogun as well. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to ask the Sony engineers for, and that's some onboard memory. 64 gigs would be great. That would mean that you'd never forget your memory card, and that you'd always have the fastest memory available for a high-speed burst and for high-quality video. Well, I have come to the end of the review and the end of the review period, so I've got to put the A7R Mark III back in the box and return it to Sony. And I'll tell you, honestly, this is one time I'm very reluctant to do so. I'd love to own this camera.